Every morning, Marcus would walk out to his driveway, coffee in hand, ready to start his day. And every morning, his meticulously ordered world was violated. The black plastic trash can lay on its side like a felled beast, its lid flung wide open. A grotesque tapestry of coffee grounds, eggshells, and shredded mail was strewn across his manicured lawn. And the smell, a sour, sweet, and deeply unpleasant odor, would hit him, a foul greeting that mocked the rich aroma of his dark roast. For weeks, he operated on a cycle of annoyance and rationalization. Raccoons, he concluded. They're clever, determined. He even bought a bungee cord to secure the lid. But the next morning, the scene was the same. Perhaps a particularly violent gust of wind, he thought, though the other cans on the street stood perfectly upright. A nagging feeling, small and cold, began to form in his gut. This felt less like an act of nature, and more like a message. Then came the morning. He decided to check the doorbell camera footage. He dismissed it before, assuming it would just show the blurry, nocturnal scuttling of a masked bandit. But this was 5:47 a.m. The sky is soft, pre-dawn periwinkle. The motion-activated light flared, and there she was, his neighbor, Brenda, from the Homeowners Association. She wasn't skulking or hiding. She walked with a purposeful, almost cheerful stride. Her pastel tracksuit a blur of mint green in the high-definition frame. She didn't even break her step. As she passed his can, she gave a firm, two-handed shove, sending it toppling over with a dull thud he could almost hear through the silent video. She continued on her power walk, never looking back, as if she'd simply tossed a piece of litter into a bin. Her name was Karen, not just in the modern, meme-worthy sense, but literally, Karen Henderson. And in that moment, watching the replay again and again, Marcus's annoyance crystallized into something harder and colder. This wasn't about trash. It was personal. The memory of their last interaction flashed before his eyes. It had been about his fence, a beautiful, rustic cedar design he'd spent 2 weekends building. Karen, in her official HOA capacity, had appeared with a clipboard and a pinched expression. The fence was 6 inches too high. The stain was not from the pre-approved earth tone palette, and the post constituted an unauthorized structural modification. Her words were clipped, legalistic, delivered with the smug finality of a judge passing a life sentence. He'd argued, passionately, about property rights and aesthetic freedom, but she had simply tapped her clipboard. The covenants are clear, Mr. Davies. Tear it down or we will issue fines. He had torn it down. The pile of splintered cedar behind his shed was a monument to his defeat. Now, watching her methodically destroy his peace every morning, he understood the true nature of their conflict. The fence was just a pretext. This was about control. The HOA was her kingdom, and his slight defiance had been an act of treason. Since she couldn't find him for his taste in fencing, she had found another way to assert her dominance. The toppled trash can wasn't vandalism. It was a statement. It was her way of reminding him daily that she held the power. She could make his home, his sanctuary, smell like decay and look like a mess. She could force him to start each day on his knees, picking through garbage. Marcus took a long, slow sip of his coffee, the bitterness now matching his mood. The cold knot in his stomach had melted, replaced by a simmering resolve. He wasn't looking at a trash problem anymore. He was looking at a war. And as he stood there in his driveway, the scattered refuse at his feet, he began to plan his counterattack. The legend of Karen was not something whispered in secret. It was a quiet, accepted truth in the Oak Creek subdivision. She was a self-appointed queen of the HOA, a title earned through a relentless campaign of clipboard vigilance and perfectly typed violation notices. Her domain stretched across 37 manicured lawns, and her word was law. She was the kind of person who'd cite you for a faded mailbox, a garden gnome deemed excessively whimsical, or for leaving your garage door open for more than 10 minutes while you unloaded groceries. Everyone knew her, her name spoken with a sigh of resignation, but nobody dared confront her. The path of least resistance was paved with her approval. Marcus had moved into the neighborhood just a few months earlier, a hard-working single father and a local firefighter. To him, this quiet cul-de-sac represented stability and peace for his young daughter, Lily. He kept his property spotless, his grass cut to regulation height, his dues paid on time. He followed the rules not out of fear, but out of an innate sense of order and community. He was, by all accounts, a model citizen. But for some reason, Karen's radar had locked onto him from the start. Perhaps it was the simple, modern Adirondack chairs on his porch that clashed with her preferred Victorian aesthetic. Maybe it was the sight of his fire engine red pickup truck, a splash of vibrant color in a sea of beige and silver sedans. The campaign began subtly. A note slipped into his screen door, written in her precise cursive. A friendly reminder. Trash receptacles must be placed parallel to the curb, not perpendicular. Another appeared a week later. The wildflower section in your side garden is beginning to appear unkempt. Consider begonias. Then came the official complaints to the HOA board. She cited as unsightly trash cans, claiming their slight weathering. A faint smudge of dirt, a small scrape from the collection truck, constituted a blight on community standards. Marcus attended the meeting, bewildered. He stood before the board-looking board members, holding up his perfectly standard, slightly used trash can. "It's a trash can," he'd said, his voice calm but firm. "It holds trash. It gets dirty." The board, weary of Karen's fervor, had dismissed the complaint with a wave of a hand. This public dismissal was a declaration of war in Karen's eyes. The board's inaction was an unforgivable slight. If they would not enforce her order, she would enforce it herself. And so, the ritual began. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, before the sun had fully crested the rooftops, Karen would emerge, clad in a plush robe and fuzzy slippers, a steaming mug of tea in one hand. She would strut down her driveway with the purpose of a general inspecting troops. She'd cast a quick, practiced glance around the sleeping street, and with a motion that had become chillingly efficient, she would plant her hands on the plastic shell of Marcus's can and shove. It wasn't a frantic push of anger, but a deliberate, almost ceremonial toppling. The can would hit the asphalt with a resonant clatter, its contents spilling out like a sacrifice. She would then continue her stroll, sipping her tea, as if she had simply corrected a painting hanging slightly askew. And Marcus? He now had the one thing that could dethrone a queen, irrefutable proof. The high-definition footage from his doorbell camera was more than just evidence of vandalism. It was a document of her smug expression, her casual gait, the utter normality she projected while committing her petty act of dominion. The cold anger he felt was now tempered by a clear, focused strategy. He wasn't just going to stop her. He was going to expose the farce. Copying the video file to a thumb drive, he knew his next move wasn't to the HOA board. Now, Marcus wasn't the type to start drama. His entire career was built on de-escalation and calm, professional control in the face of chaos. But he also wasn't about to let someone walk all over him or his property. A direct confrontation with Karen would be futile. It would be her word against his, and she thrived in a kind of heated, personal conflict that he despised. He needed a solution that spoke for itself, one that delivered its own brand of poetic justice. So, he decided to get creative. The following weekend, while his daughter Lily was at a friend's house, Marcus transformed his garage into a workshop. His trash can, the silent victim of weekly assaults, stood center stage. This wasn't just about revenge. It was an engineering project, a puzzle to be solved. Using a mix of sensors, a secondary, hidden motion-activated camera, and a little help from his firefighter buddies, who knew a thing or two about rigging safe, but startling surprises for training exercises, Marcus turned his ordinary trash can into a Trojan horse. His captain, a burly man named Rodriguez with a love for practical jokes, had been particularly enthusiastic. Think of it as a non-lethal, neighborhood-friendly version of a breach and clear charge, he joked, clapping Marcus on the back. The core of the system was a high-sensitivity tilt sensor, carefully calibrated to ignore the jostling of the garbage truck, but the trigger at the can was tilted beyond 45 degrees. This was connected to two primary countermeasures. The first was a small air-pressurized mechanism mounted inside the lid, armed with a packet of vibrant, washable, non-toxic green dye, the kind used in prank videos. If triggered, it would release a satisfying pff and a splash of color, not enough to cause damage, but more than enough to startle and mark the perpetrator. The second was an audio module connected to a separate motion sensor on the can's exterior. If anyone lingered too close with malicious intent, loitering before the push, a small but powerful speaker would boom, "Step away from the trash can," in a deep, automated voice. It was over the top, he knew, but the goal was maximum psychological impact. The final piece was a second, smaller camera, disguised as a bolt on the can itself, providing an undeniable, ground-level view of the action. He synced everything to a battery pack nestled safely among the trash bags. The stage was set. The next trash day arrived with a clear, crisp sky. Marcus rolled his newly fortified can to the curb, a strange sense of anticipation buzzing in his veins. He then retreated to his porch with a cup of coffee and his phone, pretending to be engrossed in the news. The live feed from both his doorbell and the trash can camera was open on his screen. The neighborhood stirred to life. Cars left driveways. The garbage truck rumbled in the distance. And then, right on schedule, Karen emerged. The familiar pastel tracksuit, the purposeful stride. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the windows of surrounding houses before locking onto Marcus's trash can. She didn't even see him on the porch. As she approached, the motion sensor on the can activated. "Step away from the trash can," the speaker boomed, shattering the morning quiet. Karen froze mid-stride, her head snapping toward the can, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face. She took a hesitant step back, confusion warring with indignation. But her pride, that towering, fragile thing, wouldn't let her be bossed around by an appliance. She steeled herself, muttered something under her breath, and stepped forward again, planting her hands firmly on the plastic. She shoved. The can teetered and fell. As it hit the pavement, there was a sharp sound from inside the lid. A spray of brilliant emerald green dye erupted, coating her hands, her pristine tracksuit jacket, and splattering across her face and neck. She let out a short, sharp scream, stumbling backward and stared at her stained hands in horror. On his porch, Marcus took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply tapped the record button on his phone, ensuring he captured the perfect, high-definition image of the dethroned queen, standing stunned and splattered in green, her morning routine irrevocably and very visibly disrupted. Right on schedule, Karen appeared. The morning sun glinted off her oversized sunglasses as she descended her pristine front steps. She was a vision of suburban entitlement. A plush white robe, a steaming ceramic mug bearing the phrase "Boss Lady," and that smug, self-satisfied little grin she always wore during her morning rounds. She took a leisurely sip, her eyes scanning the street before locking on to her target. With the practiced ease of a commuter on a familiar route, she strolled over to Marcus's driveway. There was a moment's pause, a slight adjustment of her grip on the mug. And then, just like always, she planted her hands and gave the trash can a solid, contemptuous shove. What happened next was not part of her routine. A deafening, automated voice boomed, "Step away from the trash can." It was so loud it seemed to vibrate in her bones. Before the shock could even register, there was a sharp, pneumatic whoosh. A puff of vibrant neon blue dye erupted from the toppling can, a cloud of synthetic sapphire that caught the morning light. It coated the front of her white robe in a Jackson Pollock-esque splatter, splashed across her hands and arms, and even speckled her Boss Lady mug, turning her coffee a murky, unappetizing green. A piercing, gargled scream tore from her throat, loud enough to rattle windows and wake the entire block. "AGH, what is this?" she shrieked, flailing her blue-stained hands as if she could shake the color off. Curtains twitched up and down the street. Front doors cracked open. Neighbors, previously hidden in their morning routines, were now silent spectators to her humiliation. "I've been attacked!" she yelled to no one and everyone, her voice cracking with a mixture of fury and panic. "This is assault." It was then that Marcus calmly walked down his driveway, his phone held aloft, its lens capturing every glorious detail. He didn't shout. He didn't smirk. His voice was calm, steady, and carried perfectly in the sudden quiet that followed her outburst. "Karen," he said, his tone almost conversational, "you might want to smile for the camera. The H-Way is going to love this one." The effect was instantaneous. She froze, her blue-stained hand suspended in midair. The reality of the situation crashed down upon her with the force of physical blow. The camera, the dye, the audience. She had been outmaneuvered, and the evidence was literally all over her. Her face, visible beneath the sunglasses, cycled through shock, rage, and finally, a pale, dawning horror. Without another word, she turned and fled, a splattered blue phantom retreating to her castle, leaving a trail of stunned silence in her wake. Within the hour, Marcus had compiled the footage. He didn't need to add dramatic music or captions. The video was perfect in its raw, unedited state. He uploaded it to the sprawling Oak Creek HOA group chat. The caption was simple, a masterclass in understated irony, friendly reminder to respect other people's property. The fallout was swift, public, and utterly merciless. Karen, scrambling to salvage her reputation, tried to spin the story at the emergency HOA meeting. Her voice, usually so sharp and commanding, now held a desperate, reedy quality. She claimed she had been conducting a routine inspection for rule violations regarding the unauthorized modifications to the trash can. When that elicited a chorus of disbelieving scoff from the gathered neighbors, she pivoted, insisting she had merely been helping to reposition the can for the safety of the collection crew. But her words rang hollow against the visual evidence. The phantom of the neon blue dye still seemed to cling to her every time she gestured. People saw the ghost of that humiliating spray. The video, played on a tablet passed around the room, was the final, unassailable truth. It wasn't just the act of pushing the can. It was a predatory stroll, the smug grin, the deliberate and practiced shove. The HOA board, their own credibility on the line, had no choice. They issued an official written reprimand citing her for harassment and repeated interference with private property. The vote to remove her from her volunteer position on the architectural committee was unanimous. But the true judgment came not from the board, but from the neighborhood itself. The silent approval she had once commanded through fear had evaporated. Now, when she walked her dog, curtains twitched with open scrutiny, not hidden anxiety. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid her now held her gaze, their expressions cool and unwavering. The message was clear. Her reign as the self-appointed sheriff of Oak Creek was over. As for Marcus, he was approached by several neighbors, urging him to press formal charges for vandalism, but he declined. His goal had never been to see her in handcuffs or dragged through the courts. He was a firefighter, not a prosecutor. His instinct was to extinguish the blaze, not to fan the flames. He had simply wanted peace on his own property, and to demonstrate to his daughter and his neighbors that they didn't have to tolerate bullies, no matter how fancy their title, how pristine their lawn, or how loud their voice. His smart trash can have been a non-violent, definitive answer to a persistent problem. Justice, in his view, had already been served in the court of public opinion, and was painted a very satisfying shade of blue. Weeks passed. The excitement died down, replaced by a new, more relaxed normal. The neighborhood chat was no longer a source of dread, but a place for genuine community updates. Then, one Tuesday morning, Marcus found a single cream-colored envelope in his mailbox. There was no return address, and the note inside was unsigned. But the handwriting was unmistakable. That same precise, almost aggressive cursive that had once delivered so many passive-aggressive violations. It contained only 3 sentences. I let my duties get the better of my judgment. My actions were unacceptable. You have my apology. It wasn't warm, and it wasn't friendly, but Marcus knew the cost of those words to the person who wrote them. It was enough. He folded the note and tucked it into a drawer, a small, quiet artifact from a brief, strange war. He rolled his trash can back from the curb that evening, its standard black plastic gleaming dully in the sunset. It stood perfectly upright, tall and unbothered amidst the others. To a casual observer, it was utterly ordinary, but to the residents of Oak Creek, it had become something more, a silent sentinel, a monument of cleverness over conflict, and maybe, just a little bit, legendary.